The story begins with a first officer named Ben. His wife calls him and asks him to come back home. Both of them have been emotionally broken because of their son's illness. She tells him to stop running away from everything. At the same time, a passenger named Dan is standing at the airport. His charging cable is faulty and smoke is coming out of it. Even so, he puts his power bank inside a red bag. According to the rules, such items should not be placed in checked baggage, but he ignores the regulation. As Ben walks through the airport, he meets a young girl named Cora. She is very afraid of flying. She asks Ben, "Are you the captain?" Ben laughs and replies, "No, I'm the first officer." Cora immediately says, "You're this old and still not a captain?" Ben smiles and answers, "Life doesn't always follow a straight path." Cora is traveling with her father, stepmother, and stepbrother, Finn. Her biological mother has placed a GPS tracker in her clothes for safety, and Cora can track it through her phone. Meanwhile, because of negligence, Dan's red bag is loaded into the cargo hold without a proper inspection. The flight is traveling from Los Angeles to Shanghai. There are also some esports players on board. An American player starts making fun of the Chinese players. His team's captain supports him, but their coach steps in, apologizes, and calms the situation down. The captain of this flight is Richard. After takeoff, we learn that Ben was once in the Air Force. He had raised his hand against a senior officer because the officer was not following regulations properly. As a result of that incident, Ben lost his job, pension, and all of his benefits. Now he works as a first officer for a small airline. On the other side, an esports player named Lily asks her captain, Sam, why he is so afraid to read her letter. Sam replies that he is not afraid. He just wants to read it after they return to China. He then heads to the washroom, where he has secretly hidden Lily's letters inside his phone case. Meanwhile, Cora's father tries to reason with her. He tells her that she should at least try to be nicer to her brother, Finn. However, Cora refuses to listen. She dislikes her stepmother and wants nothing to do with her. A few moments later, Cora's father goes to the washroom, and her stepmother follows him shortly afterward. At the same time, the faulty charging cable inside the cargo hold suddenly starts throwing sparks, causing a fire to break out. When Finn cannot find his parents, he asks Cora where they are. As a joke, Cora tells him that there is a swimming pool near the washroom and that their parents have gone there. Finn goes looking for them but accidentally wanders into another section of the aircraft. There he finds a man playing a video game. Finn sits down beside him and starts playing with him. Suddenly, a warning alert appears in the cockpit. Smoke and fire have been detected in the cargo compartment. Ben immediately activates the fire suppression system, but it fails to work properly. Realizing that the situation is getting worse, he contacts air traffic control and asks for the nearest available airport. They determine that Guam International Airport is the closest option, approximately 400 nautical miles away. Meanwhile, Cora heads toward the washroom to call her father. At the same time, two crew members grab fire extinguishers and enter the cargo compartment to fight the fire. However, the flames spread rapidly. A burning cargo container breaks loose from its restraints and slides forward, crashing into several cylinders. The impact triggers a disaster inside the aircraft. As the cylinders explode, a massive hole is torn into the plane's fuselage. Luggage is thrown through the cabin and several passengers are injured. Amid the chaos, Lily grabs Cora and tries to keep her safe. Oxygen masks immediately drop from the ceiling in front of all the passengers. However, Cora's father and stepmother are unconscious inside the washroom and have no idea what is happening. Flying debris continues to injure people throughout the cabin. Somehow, Captain Richard manages to bring the aircraft down to a safer altitude. He then makes an announcement, informing everyone that the plane has reached a safe altitude and that they can remove their oxygen masks. Meanwhile, Dan gets out of his seat and heads to the washroom. At the same time, Sam leaves the washroom and tries to get back to Lily as quickly as possible. However, a flight attendant stops him and orders him to remain seated because moving around the cabin is too dangerous. Inside the washroom, Dan starts smoking. At that very moment, the fire in the cargo compartment grows even worse. The burning container crashes into one of the engines. The engine explodes violently, tearing another huge hole in the side of the aircraft. Some passengers are nearly sucked out of the plane as the situation spirals further out of control. Things become even worse when the flight controls suddenly stop responding. At that moment, the aircraft is flying over the open ocean. A short time later, the second engine also catches fire. Now the plane loses both electrical power and radio communication. Realizing the situation is slipping out of control, Ben immediately deploys the ram air turbine (RAT). Fortunately, It restores power to the aircraft's essential instruments, giving the crew a small but crucial ray of hope. Inside the plane, Cora tries to run toward her parents, but a flight attendant grabs her and stops her. Meanwhile, Captain Richard realizes that there is no longer any chance of reaching an airport. He decides that the only option left is to ditch the aircraft in the ocean. He immediately tells Ben to begin dumping fuel. Richard then makes an announcement, warning all passengers to brace for impact. Terrified, everyone bends forward in their seats, but the aircraft is descending rapidly. In the cockpit, Richard and Ben continue discussing the safest way to land in such a critical situation. Ben suggests turning the aircraft and bringing it down parallel to the ocean waves. Together they do everything they can to reduce the plane's speed. Richard then tells Ben, "Recline your seat all the way back and tighten your harness." The entire cabin echoes with screams as panic spreads among the passengers. A moment later, the aircraft slams into the ocean with tremendous force. It skids across the water before crashing into rocks beneath the surface. The impact is devastating. One of the wings breaks off completely, and the aircraft flips over. Moments later, the fuselage splits into two sections. Water begins rushing in from every direction, and many passengers lose their lives in the crash itself. Sometime later, pieces of the wreckage and several bodies can be seen floating in the ocean. The survivors cry out desperately for help. Inside the cockpit, Richard lies unconscious while the pressure of the water keeps building against the windshield. On the other side of the wreckage, flight attendant Penny has been holding on to Cora the entire time. Looking through the broken aircraft, Cora realizes that the three major sections of the plane have drifted far apart from one another. Penny tells Cora to stay where she is and makes her way to the cockpit, where Ben is struggling to free Richard from his seat. Just then, Richard regains consciousness. He tells Ben to use the crash axe and cut through the seat so he can be pulled out. Meanwhile, in the middle section of the wreckage, Sam realizes that Lily is no longer in her seat. Most of the people around him are badly injured. Growing more desperate by the second, Sam begins calling out Lily's name again and again, hoping she will answer. Meanwhile, the rear section of the aircraft is floating upside down in the ocean. Finn is trapped there with another passenger, while flight attendant Joey stays by his side. At the same time, Lily manages to swim to one of the broken sections of the plane. Blood is continuously flowing from an injury on her leg. Back in the cockpit, Ben and Penny do everything they can to free Richard, but they fail. To make matters worse, the cockpit windshield looks like it could shatter at any moment. Ben realizes that the only way to free Richard would be to cut off his trapped leg, but that would almost certainly cause him to bleed to death. Richard understands the situation. He tells Ben to close the cockpit door and leave so that the flooding remains contained inside the cockpit and does not spread to the rest of the aircraft. Then he looks at Ben and says, "The plane is yours now. Go home and be with your son." As Ben prepares to leave, Richard reminds him to check the ELT. When Ben looks outside, he is shocked by what he sees. Most of the passengers in the rear section are dead, and the entire section is trapped upside down in the water. At that moment, Finn's mother regains consciousness inside the washroom. She wakes Cora's father as well. But the instant they open the door, water rushes inside at full force. Alone in the cockpit, Richard takes out a photograph of his family and stares at it. Moments later, the windshield finally gives way, and a torrent of seawater sweeps him away. Meanwhile, in the rear section, an elderly woman named Becky is still alive. She regains consciousness, giving the survivors a small sense of hope. Everyone soon realizes that the water level is rising steadily, so they need to move to a higher position. Every aircraft carries an ELT, or emergency locator transmitter. This device sends out the aircraft's location to rescue teams. The problem is that the ELT is located in the middle section of the wreckage. To find out whether it activated automatically after the crash, someone has to swim all the way there. Ben decides that he will go himself. Before leaving, he gives the life raft to Penny and Cora. However, Penny points out that Cora used to be a professional swimmer. Cora insists on coming along because she wants to find her mother, father, and brother. Penny tries to convince her to stay behind. She tells Cora to remain where she is and to keep hold of her shoes. With that, Penny dives into the water herself and begins swimming toward the wreckage. As soon as Penny leaves, Cora spots sharks in the ocean. She starts screaming at the top of her lungs, trying to warn Penny, but Penny is too far away to hear what she is saying. At that moment, Ben lowers the life raft into the water, and he and Cora begin moving toward Penny. Meanwhile, the people trapped inside the rear section of the aircraft are alive only because of a small air pocket. If they open the exit door, the entire section will flood and sink, killing everyone inside. Out in the ocean, the shark is now dangerously close to Penny. She can hear Cora shouting in the distance, but she cannot make out the words. A second later, the shark attacks. Ben does everything he can to pull Penny to safety, but he is unable to save her. The shark then turns its attention to their raft. Ben grabs an oar and fights it off, desperately pushing it away. Somehow he manages to drive it back. At the same time, in the middle section of the wreckage, all the survivors gather in one corner. With everyone's weight concentrated on one side, the entire section shifts forward slightly. During the movement, a woman loses her footing and falls into the water. Fortunately, she manages to pull herself back up before being swept away. Meanwhile, in the overturned rear section, Joey is bandaging Matt's injured hand. Everyone is doing their best to calm a frightened Finn. Back in the middle section, Sam tells the group that some people need to move back toward the flooded side. Their section of the aircraft is resting on top of a coral reef, and if the weight is not redistributed, it could slide off at any moment. However, the American player Hutch refuses outright. Another argument breaks out between him and Sam. Even Hutch's coach admits that Sam is right. JC agrees to move toward the water side to help balance the wreckage, but Hutch remains stubborn and refuses to cooperate. Meanwhile, the broken section of the aircraft that Lily is clinging to begins drifting farther away. Despite her injured leg, she has no choice but to get back into the water and swim. After a difficult struggle, she finally reaches the midsection of the wreckage. Sam is relieved to see her alive, and the two are reunited. But the moment is short-lived. A shark suddenly attacks the coach. JC immediately jumps in to help, but he too becomes a victim of the shark. Witnessing this, Hutch completely loses his temper. He blames Sam for everything that has happened and starts beating him. Just then, Ben arrives and pulls Hutch away before the fight gets any worse. Meanwhile, in the rear section of the plane, Joey says she might be able to swim underneath the wreckage and find a way out. However, Matt stops her. Even though his hand is broken, he insists on going himself. Becky tries to talk him out of it, but Matt refuses to listen. Using only one good arm, he lowers himself into the water and begins swimming beneath the aircraft. After a difficult journey under the wreckage, he finally reaches the surface. The moment he comes up for air, he starts shouting for help. That's when he spots Cora's father in the distance. But before either of them can react, a shark suddenly attacks and drags him underwater. Matt watches in horror and screams in terror. Back in the midsection, Ben tells everyone just how lucky they are to be alive. There were 293 people on board the aircraft, but he can see barely 30 survivors now. A few life rafts are still available, giving the group at least some chance of survival. Ben then begins searching for the ELT, the emergency locator transmitter. Meanwhile, Cora continues looking desperately for her father. Eventually, Ben manages to activate the ELT and hands it to Dan so he can keep hold of it. At that very moment, a shark starts moving toward Cora. Ben rushes in and manages to save her just in time. But their problems are far from over. One of their life rafts drifts away from the wreckage, and water begins flooding the midsection again. In the middle of the chaos, the ELT slips from Dan's hands and falls into the ocean. Meanwhile, Sam is floating separately in the ocean, using a suitcase to stay afloat. Beside him is an unconscious Hutch. When Ben asks Dan for the ELT, Dan admits that it fell into the water. Instead of apologizing, he starts blaming Ben, saying that if the device was so important, Ben should have held onto it himself. At that moment, Cora spots Sam floating in the distance. Ben immediately realizes that they have to rescue them as well. However, sharks are now circling the area from every direction. Dan refuses to go. He has no intention of risking his life. In a fit of anger, he punches Ben and blames him for the entire disaster. Ben punches him back and firmly tells him that they are going and Dan is coming with him. A short time later, Ben and Dan reach Sam and Hutch. The sharks are already closing in on them, but Ben manages to pull both men to safety just in time. Meanwhile, in the overturned rear section of the aircraft, it has become impossible to wait any longer. Becky refuses to leave. Instead, she tells Joey to take Finn and get out. Joey promises that she will come back for her. She then takes Finn and begins making her way out of the wreckage. Along the way, they come across Matt's body. Despite the shock, they keep moving and eventually reach the surface. Nearby, an unopened life raft has drifted close to them. Back at the midsection, Lily suddenly spots an airplane flying overhead. Everyone begins waving their arms and shouting for help with all the strength they have left. For a moment, they think they have been saved. But the aircraft never sees them and continues on its way. Meanwhile, Joey manages to inflate the life raft. She is just about to place Finn inside when a shark suddenly attacks. Fortunately, before it can reach them, several sharks begin fighting among themselves, creating a brief opportunity for Joey and Finn to escape. Her leg is bleeding heavily. Just a few seconds later, she loses consciousness. Now Finn is completely alone. He starts screaming for help at the top of his lungs. Then he suddenly feels the raft shaking from below. When he looks over the edge, he sees a shark slam into the underside of the raft. The impact causes Finn to lose his balance, and he ends up hanging over the side of the raft. Meanwhile, in the overturned section of the aircraft, the water has risen all the way to Becky's neck. As she waits, thoughts of her granddaughter begin filling her mind. She quietly prays that her granddaughter's life will be full of happiness and joy. At that moment, a helicopter appears in the sky, searching for survivors. At the same time, a Chinese fishing vessel is contacted and informed about the plane crash nearby. The crew is told to reach the area as quickly as possible and assist with the rescue operation. Meanwhile, aboard one of the life rafts, Hutch notices that Sam keeps looking toward Lily. He tells him, "Why don't you just tell her how you feel?" Sam shakes his head and says he can't. Their team's rules do not allow players to date each other. Hutch laughs and replies, "Who actually cares about rules like that?" By now, Cora has started to realize that her family may no longer be alive. She remembers her father's words. He had told her to look after Finn, but she couldn't do it. After all, Finn is only 7 years old. Seeing how devastated she is, Ben tries to comfort her. He tells her that his own son is 7 years old as well. Then he takes out an old photograph of his son and shows it to Cora. Just then, a rescue helicopter appears in the distance, heading toward the survivors. For the first time in hours, hope returns to everyone's faces. A rescue swimmer is lowered from the helicopter, but Ben immediately starts shouting, "No! Don't come down." Unfortunately, the crew cannot understand his warning. The moment the swimmer enters the water, a shark attacks. The crew tries to pull her back up immediately, but the shark leaps out of the water and clamps its jaws around her. Because the rescue line is still attached, the helicopter's balance is thrown off. Within seconds, the aircraft begins spinning uncontrollably before crashing into the ocean. The impact creates a massive wave that flips over the survivors' raft. Everyone struggles in the water but somehow manages to climb back aboard. However, during the chaos, Dan pushes a flight attendant aside while trying to save himself. She falls straight into the ocean, and within moments, the sharks surround her. At that same time, a Chinese fishing vessel finally arrives at the crash site. Unfortunately, the ship cannot get close enough to the survivors because a coral reef and shallow water block its path. Now the survivors must somehow make their own way to the vessel. The problem is that their raft has no paddles. Then Ben suddenly realizes that Cora is missing. Looking around, he spots her standing alone on a distant piece of the wreckage. Without wasting a second, Ben dives into the water and starts swimming toward her. But a shark is following behind him. Somehow, Ben reaches Cora and tells her that they need to leave immediately. Cora refuses. She says that she wants to stay there with her daddy. Ben gently explains that they only need to take a different path to get somewhere safe. Then he secures Cora to himself, and the two begin moving through the water together. The situation is extremely dangerous. Sharks are everywhere. Seeing this, the Chinese fishermen make a bold decision. They dump all of their freshly caught fish into the ocean. The sharks immediately become distracted and rush toward the easy food. However, a few sharks continue chasing Ben and Cora. That's when Ben pulls out a flare gun and fires directly at one of them. The bright flare scares the predators away, and the remaining sharks finally turn toward the fish instead, giving Ben and Cora a chance to escape. Meanwhile, Dan spots a pack of cigarettes floating in the water. He picks it up, sits comfortably on the edge of the raft and lights a cigarette. But his relief doesn't last long. A moment later, a shark attacks him and drags him into the ocean. To be honest, no one is particularly saddened by his fate. Eventually, the remaining survivors are rescued safely. Afterward, Sam talks to Lily. He tells her that he never read her letter and that it is probably lost somewhere in the depths of the ocean by now. Lily smiles and says she already knows he read it. He was only hiding his feelings because of the team's rules. Hearing that, Sam gently kisses her on the forehead. A little later, Ben walks over to Cora. Just then, everyone's phones suddenly regain signal. Cora immediately asks for Ben's phone and checks the location of Finn's GPS tracker. Once they have the location, the rescue team heads in that direction. Soon they spot a life raft floating on the water. Inside, Joey is lying unconscious. A short while later, she regains consciousness and points toward the person lying beside her. It's Finn. The moment Cora sees him, tears of joy fill her eyes. The brother and sister are finally reunited. Cora apologizes for the way she treated him and pulls him into a hug. In the final moments of the story, we learn that Ben's son is battling a serious illness, cancer. Ben calls his wife and then speaks to his son. With emotion in his voice, he tells him, "I'm coming home." And with that heartfelt moment, the story comes to an end. So, friends, what did you think of this movie? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this explanation, don't forget to like the video. And for more movie recaps like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.